Sci-fi, horror, fantasy, absurdism in the extreme. It's all available here in the Tales from the Omni Vault book series. Check the description for Amazon links so you can get your copies and start reading today. Thank you all, and now, on to the video. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni Viewer, and I plowed through all 10 episodes of Batman Caped Crusader Season 1 to share my thoughts on it. There will be minor spoilers as the video goes on, but I will give you fair warning before I get into any of those. So, just to start off with, if you're not familiar with this series, basically it's sort of a harkening back to Batman the Animated Series, but a little bit darker and heavier, if you will. So, not necessarily made for a Saturday morning cartoon crowd. It's made for a slightly more adult crowd, so it's gonna go to places that the original cartoon couldn't necessarily go blatantly. Of course, that original cartoon did go to some pretty heavy places, let's not kid ourselves. For a cartoon that was meant to be aimed at kids, it explored stuff that, even as adults, we find hard to handle. But there were certain things it couldn't do, like it couldn't be too violent, you couldn't technically kill anybody, although you could kind of imply it, you couldn't curse or anything. So, Caped Crusader is allowed to get away with a little bit more. Now, it is always possible that when a series is given that level of freedom, it will be abused. Like, they realize, oh, we can do stuff we couldn't do on a kid's show? That means we're gonna do all the things we can't do on a kid's show. I'm happy to report that Caped Crusader doesn't go that far. It does have a little bit of language. It is certainly more violent than the animated series, and far more disturbing in certain ways. More obviously disturbing, I guess you could say. But it's not like they suddenly went from mild PG to hard R. It's still in a PG-13 range, I guess you could say. In fact, its official rating, at least as of my viewing, is TV-14. I don't know if they're going to change that down the line, but right now that's where it sits at, so, you know, teenagers and up, it's probably a suitable viewing. Anybody that's too young, it's going to be a little much. So, I can at least applaud the show for that. They were given more freedom to be darker and edgier and more brutal, but they didn't overextend themselves in doing that. What about the rest of it? Well, I find myself thinking that Caped Crusader is good, not necessarily great, not necessarily terrible. It was okay. It was pretty good. Worth a watch. Best Batman? I'm not so sure, but certainly not a bad interpretation. Now, may as well start by addressing the elephant in the room, or should I say the penguin in the room. Just the other day, because it was the last day I could possibly speculate about it sight unseen, I did a video chiming in with my thoughts on the choice to make the Penguin a woman in this series, going from Oswald Cobblepot to Oswalda Cobblepot. And I said that while I'm not necessarily completely opposed to the idea of gender-flipping characters, I couldn't think of a reason why that had to be done with the Penguin, but I would know if there was a reason when I saw it. I can tell you now that I didn't see it. I have watched the series. The Penguin's only in one episode, and it's actually the first episode, and I really can't think of a reason to justify the change. The Penguin could just as easily have been a guy. They could have altered that scene where she's performing on the Iceberg Lounge vessel to having her be one of the dancers and the male penguins in the crowd. And otherwise, I just can't think of a reason. Even the whole thing about, well, she's got this group of men she's with that she refers to as her boys, and they refer to her as Mama. So there's some sort of really disturbing mother-son dynamic. Except, you know, if you know anything about penguins, first of all, they co-parent when the egg hatches, and second, it's the male that usually takes care of the eggs. So, again, can't really justify it there either. I don't know, it felt completely unnecessary. I did not see anything in the series that made me think, ah yes, this version of the Penguin absolutely did have to be a woman. Nothing like that. But Penguin's only in the first episode, so whatever. Penguin's not the only character that gets changed, though. And some of the changes work and some of them don't. The Clayface episode is actually one of my favorites, because there are a lot of references to Golden Age Hollywood, particularly in the horror realm. Clayface here is reimagined as kind of a Boris Karloff allegory. In fact, his name here is Basil Karlo, which is taking the name Basil Rathbone and Boris Karloff and kind of mashing them together. And throughout the episode, you see in the background homages to famous movie posters. None of them actual movie posters, but you can tell which ones inspired them if you actually know what the movie posters look like. The way the characters speak, Clayface's costume being clearly inspired by The Shadow, which just makes me now want to see an animated series based on The Shadow. There were a lot of good things in there. I think they really did make that one work. But then you get to things like how Harley Quinn is done. And, you know, Bruce Timm, originally he had his quote that was circulating around of, "Wait till they get a load of Harley." Although there didn't seem to be much of a negative response to Harley at first. Now this is one of your spoiler warnings, because I can't very well talk about Harley Quinn without talking about the things that aren't given away in the trailers. To start with, she does not feel like Harley Quinn in any particular way. She feels more like Dr. Hugo Strange with elements of the Scarecrow mixed in. But even then, it's not exactly that. It almost seems like she's, for all intents and purposes, a new character, because there's really nothing about her that has anything to do with the original Harley Quinn, or even modern-day Harley Quinn, the one that's popularized in her own animated series, or the Suicide Squad movies, or things like that, where, yeah, she's liberated from the Joker and everything, but she's still very bouncy and has a sick, dark sense of humor, and you know what I'm talking about. This character, this version of Harley Quinn, is very serious. She's like kinda sort of bubbly in her regular time, but when she's in costume, deadly serious, and not really the sort of character that fits. Well, again, much like how I can't think of a reason for the Penguin to have been female, I can't really think of a reason for this character to be Harley Quinn. And there's actually a bit of a, I guess you could say there's a bit of an inconsistency with how she's portrayed. When we first meet her, Bruce Wayne is sent to her because he punched a guy, and in order for there not to be charges, he agreed to see her as a court-ordered therapy session, and he has so many sessions to go. And he goes through all of them. By the end, Harley says, "I'm gonna sign your papers, say you're off the hook, because I can't get through to you. Whatever you're hiding, if you even are hiding everything, it's too much for me to break through right now." And Alfred's initially hoping that maybe Bruce will go back to her, but Bruce is just like, "No, don't need it, don't want it, I'm Batman, that's all I need." The very next episode, Harley is called in by the police to profile Batman as part of their Batman task force, and she seems to have put together a pretty solid profile of him, yet there's never any indication that she might have thought, I wonder if Bruce and Batman might have some kind of a connection. which, I mean, sure, it's obvious to us from the outside looking in, but she didn't even consider it. And then the episode after that, which I think is her focus episode, if I'm remembering the order correctly, we learn that her psychotic profile, if you will, is that she specifically targets millionaires and wealthy men and tortures and twists them for her own deranged experiments. Her end goal isn't entirely made clear, but the fact that she's doing it at all is still pretty messed up. And that just raises the question, why didn't she make a play for Bruce anyway? You know, I mean, they easily could have done it like she was thinking, he's a tough nut to crack, but I will crack him somehow. And so she captures him, and he's got to figure a way out without any of his backup gear. I don't know. It just felt a little weird in that regard. Like, again, at what point do we just say this is a brand new character? Yet there are also things that work surprisingly well, particularly the overarching plot involving Harvey Dent and his journey to becoming Two-Face. Now, I have a feeling that the people who worked on this series must have watched Beware the Batman, which did something very similar about Harvey Dent running for mayor and becoming Two-Face by the end. But they were largely setting Two-Face up for season 2 with that series, and unfortunately, despite how good it was, everybody slept on Beware the Batman, so season 2 never happened. So they were probably thinking, okay, gotta actually complete the Two-Face thing this time. And it's similar to what we see in Beware the Batman, but it's not a rehash. Harvey is, well, I guess he's a bit harder to pin down for the first couple episodes, because they largely focus on him being kind of acerbic, hard to like, and only ever occasionally hint at the fact that he's actually not such a bad guy. The fact that he is actually a decent person becomes clearer as things wear on, and it's clearest right before he has the acid thrown in his face and he becomes Two-Face. Design-wise, I mean, they basically just melt half of his face. They don't go for the split color or anything, which isn't one of my favorite Two-Face designs, I won't lie, but they actually do manage to make it work by way of how they depict it. The surprising thing to me, actually, is that when, of course, everybody knows, when Harvey gets his face half melted, his personality splits. But usually it's depicted that, like, the more monstrous looking side represents the bad side. That's the predictable thing. CAPED Crusader actually does it where the monstrous side represents his good side. They depict it very subtly. Whenever he's being peaceful and sort of self-deprecating and thinking, I just need to be locked away, I've done terrible things, I'm so guilty of all of this stuff, his melted face half is facing the camera. And when he starts getting angry or something like that, his unmelted half faces the camera. They even do it straight on shots where he's aiming a gun, and when he's deciding he's going to kill, the gun covers the melted half and you see only the normal looking side. Interesting little twist on the character. Unfortunately, they remove something that's kind of important: the coin. One of the most frightening things about Two-Face as he's traditionally portrayed is the fact that he leaves certain decisions up to a coin flip. And that's terrifying because you don't know what he's gonna do. He doesn't even know what he's gonna do. He's leaving it up to chance. And if it lands heads, you might get a good result. If it lands tails, you're in trouble. That is a very disturbing thing. And they don't do that in this series. For some reason, even though he has the coin and they establish it's got two heads on it, so you know, it's that whole heads I win, tails you lose thing. Oh, it always lands heads, which is supposed to signify he's not such a bad guy after all. Well, despite that, they don't actually make use of it. There are 3 times it's used overall. Only 2 of those times by Two-Face, and both of those times it's where he's claiming to decide somebody's fate, but somebody else says, no, you can't just leave a man's life up to the toss of a coin. And Harvey goes, yeah, you're right. Like, that's just a blatant rejection right there. And I feel that removes a layer from the character, a layer that is very important. It's still not a bad depiction of Two-Face, but why would they not introduce that? Why would they not introduce it? Why would they introduce the coin and then never use it the way it was intended? And once again, minor spoilers here, but based on how the show ends, there's no chance of that happening in season 2. One character I was actually curious about is Onomatopoeia, a character who's fairly new in the comic book continuity and has made a couple appearances in a couple of shows, I think, but this is like one of his few high-profile appearances. And, you know, he had that stylish look, and the trailer showed him doing things that reference the 60s series, because if you don't know, the definition of onomatopoeia is a word that represents a sound effect, or saying a word that represents a sound effect. So, for example, instead of actually trying to imitate the literal noise a horse makes, you say neigh. Or when in comic books there's a sound effect. The 60s Batman, right? Whenever Batman punches somebody, it's pow, zap, zlorp, KO for some reason. They got pretty weird, but onomatopoeia's shtick is that. He communicates with onomatopoeia. I was curious, but having watched the episode, as amusing as it is, I can't tell you anything about him other than that. He's a complete enigma. They do leave the door open for him to come back at some point, sure, but, like, what could they possibly do with him? I'm not sure how much there is to this character, which is kind of disappointing, because it's a clever little thing he does. It might have made more sense maybe if he was like a Deadpool character who knew he was in a comic, or in this case a cartoon, but I don't know. As it is, I was kind of left wanting. And I'm just realizing I'm this far into the video and I haven't actually spoken about Batman himself yet. So, this is once again a depiction of an earlier version of Batman. Much like with Beware the Batman or Matt Reeves' The Batman, which this show does take quite a bit of influence from, much the way the animated series took influence from the Tim Burton movies. This is a Batman early in his career, so he's still kind of... It's not that he's more brutal and still trying to figure stuff out, but he's certainly more closed off. One of the biggest signs that he has undergone some changes by the end is the fact that he refers to Alfred by his last name, Pennyworth, throughout the entire series until the very last scene where he finally calls him Alfred. So there is an interesting little way in which he's depicted like that, although, as with so many other Batman stories, he's not really usually the focus. It's more about the villains of those particular episodes. The Caped Crusader is a very episodic series, even with the underlying plot lines. But Batman's growth, you can see it, but it's not necessarily the focus every time, because the focus is more on the villains. They're the ones who have the primary conflicts. They're the ones who have the goals they're trying to accomplish. So in that sense, it certainly stays true to what the animated series was all about. It's still a pretty good depiction of Batman overall. Voice is a little odd with the raspiness, but, you know, there's always room for improvement if the show does get a second season. So, like I said, I feel that Batman Caped Crusader is a pretty good show. It didn't really blow me away but it didn't disappoint me for the most part. There are definitely things that I think could have been done better, or things that really shouldn't have been changed even though they were. But the long and the short of it is that it's fine. Like I said, I wouldn't put it as one of the top tier Batman adaptations. And I'm saying that as a guy who's a sucker for 1940s Art Deco noir diesel punk style stories. I like that kind of pulp aesthetic and atmosphere, which the show definitely delivers on. But it doesn't deliver on it in a way that's making me go, yes, I must have more. Having got to the end of the series, I feel like if it continues, I'll watch it. If it doesn't continue, I'm not going to be heartbroken. But if it does continue, I would like to see some improvements done. And maybe if you're going to make some changes, have them be changes that actually enhance things. You know, like what they did with Clayface. Not so much like what they did with Harley and Penguin. But I suppose it does get a recommendation of at least one watch through. Whether you're a Batman fan or a pulp fan or even a horror fan, because it can get pretty heavy and skew into the horror realm at times. I mean, it's interesting enough. So, yeah, that's my ultimate verdict on Batman Caped Crusader. I didn't leave this one up to a coin flip, though. I really did think hard about it after watching. So until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.